Welcome to another episode of Judge for Yourself. With elections only a few months away, debate around political party funding has again revived itself. Private funding of political parties is almost wholly unregulated. Public disclosure of party incomes and expenditures seems to be entirely discretionary. Many civil organisations are calling on political parties to disclose their funding sources, but they also want private funding for parties to be regulated by law. It's argued that without complete transparency in parties, the public sector is able to purchase political power, exacerbating corruption even further. These are questions that are not only limited to South Africa, but they're certainly important in this country. Now, to debate this topic, we're joined by the Wits University Vice Chancellor, Professor Habib, Stefan Gilbert, who is a senior researcher at the Institute for Security Studies, Mzoxolo Mpolase, Chief Analyst at Political Analysis South Africa, who's consulted for political parties. I just want to show viewers a graphic just to try to contextualize this before we begin the debate, which comes from the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Systems. In Southern Africa, only 40% of nations declare funding, while 75% of BRIC nations and almost 80% of nations globally disclose party funding. Now, this map of Africa, also from the International Institution for Democracy and Electoral Systems, shows that South Africa, in the red, is much further behind many of its democratic neighbours who actually disclose party funding. So that gives you just some sense about this is a particularly illuminating. I mean, well, but let me start with you, Adam. I mean, I've had lots of programs about this. Nothing ever seems to happen. Maybe this is yet another futile exercise, but it's not an unimportant one.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's perhaps one of the most important ones. One of the biggest deficits in South Africa is the issue of accountability. It's precisely because our political elites are unaccountable that we have the kinds of corruption we have the kinds of service delivery challenges we have. And one of the big challenges around facilitating a greater accountability in our society is the disclosure of party funding, so that parties know where the public knows where parties are getting their funding from, and then can make determinations on whether decisions of the particular ruling party or the opposition party, for that matter, is appropriate, is based in the broader public interest, or is just becoming an example
bought by some lobby or etc.
Absolutely, or becoming an example of checkbook diplomacy.
But Stefan, can I just smaller parties would say, I mean, I wanted to have the parties here. The parties are apparently saying, unless we all come, none of them are going to come, because I think they basically all seem to be in agreement about this, which is not the particular position Adam's in. But smaller parties would say, I suspect, look, in a country like South Africa, if our funding is disclosed, we're in big trouble because, you know, people will be discriminated against because of a powerful government that is likely to be re-elected, certainly in 2014, and therefore all sorts of goodies may not come our way.
Firstly, I think that is a sad indictment on the country if that in fact is the case.
But you must have heard that. I'm not.
Yeah, no, I have heard it, of course. But the claim that people who make donations to political parties are afraid of the repercussions of this. Firstly, I don't think this has been tested. We don't know. We don't have the research to say that shows that these people actually do not want to reveal that they have donated to a particular party. So I don't think that's a valid argument until we see the research that supports that. Secondly, I think the general principle is that we must have disclosure. That South Africa, as the statistics show, is one of the only countries in Southern Africa and on the continent that has absolutely no regulation whatsoever on who can donate to a political party. This is not the norm. 80% of world democracies have some kind of regulation, even if it's partial. In Africa, the majority, vast majority, have some form of regulation on private funding. Essentially, with the situation that we have now in South Africa, anybody, a foreign government, a foreign company, anybody can give money to any political party. This is, first of all, I mean, goes back to what you were saying about people should have the information available to them so they can make an informed choice. And they should know whether or not, for instance, a foreign country, a government, is supporting a particular political party.
Okay, and what is your attitude to this?
Well,
you've consulted political parties. They don't like this disclosure idea.
Yeah, of course. And part of their argument is that, especially in the South African context, party funding should remain as such in this sort of laissez-faire environment because they argue that it is some sort of competitive advantage.
What's
that
a competitive advantage?
in the sense that, you know, that is what distinguishes you from the competitor. And should you get more funding, you're likely to participate better in this democracy. So they argue that if they disclose their books and what have you, it may lead to some sort of donor attrition and also...
Why? If everybody had to disclose, what would happen?
Well, basically, it's this anonymity that is there right now ensures that in some cases you find with political parties, companies will give multiple political parties. If that is made known, that state of affairs would not hold, because you cannot have, for instance, a big bank supporting, you know,
hedging its bets.
Basically. So therefore, it also creates an impression that, you know, it's a betting environment rather than a democratic one.
Can I just ask you, what is your attitude to the point made by both my guest to the left? I'm not suggesting politically to the left, but what I'm saying is, what about the fact that it aids corruption? Because inevitably, if there's no disclosure, no sunlight, money goes under the table. It promotes levels of corruption.
Well, of course. I mean, the sort of thing is that if they are to universalize what they're doing at the party level, that's what they will do if they're in governance, particularly opposition parties. But also, this thinking that some public funds go to political parties and they're unregulated and what have you, that still happens regardless. You know, with its public sector institutions, they have to account for where that money went. So rather maybe focus right now, when it comes to public funding, parties who are in parliament, they're already being funded, but that money is not really properly regulated.
All right, we'll come back to that. I've got to take a break and we'll come back to that.
News that moves. enca.com.